Hello guys, today we're going to be talking about ashwagandha. Now this is a supplement that clients ask us about all the time and it comes with some pretty wild claims. So we're going to be talking through today basically what the evidence says, or the current state of the literature says about the use of ashwagandha. I'm going to talk you through what we've observed with our clients that have used it and how we would personally recommend you implement it and when. So, ashwagandha is a family or part of a family of herbs called adaptogens. So they're found all over like India, North Africa, the Middle East, and it's been used in like Ayurvedic medicine for a very, very long time. But there is now an increasingly large body of evidence coming out that it has some pretty cool effects, especially effects that those that are interested in building a leaner, more muscular and healthier physique should be interested in. So these effects range from increasing testosterone, increasing lean mass gains, increasing strength performance, VO2 max, it lowers cortisol, can help you with your sleep and all sorts of, pretty cool claims and quite a lot of health benefits as well. So I'm going to sort of work through those in order of which I think our clients would find the most beneficial. So firstly, and probably most interestingly, we have the increases in lean mass gains. Now, these are statistically significant if we look at the current body of literature. Now, there are some limitations, that literature, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later on. But essentially, across all the studies we have, and there are quite a few now, we do tend to see significant lean mass gains when comparing ashwagandha supplementation with placebo. Now, these lean mass gains, the word significantly is used in clinical research to basically signify that there is a noticeable difference. It doesn't mean that it's huge. Okay, so the significant differences here, to give you sort of a little bit of reference, would be about like a quarter of the size that you might get from creatine, which is cool. Creatine is a really effective supplement for us like natural guys that aren't willing to stick a needle in our ass. But you're talking grams, not kilos, if you're comparing over like a 12-week period. So there is a marginal effect by the looks of things to be had on lean mass gains. There is also a slightly larger effect, still very small, still not as big as say creatine, but slightly larger than the impact on lean mass gains. We have the benefits on 1 rep max or training performance. So again, ashwagandha appears to have a beneficial impact on training performance. I think it's something like 5 to 8% in comparison to a control group. So again, this is pretty cool. This is like low-hanging fruit. This is a serious potential benefit to your training performance, which is something we are really keen to see. Now, this may well be mediated by the benefits that it has on things like your testosterone level. So it appears that ashwagandha causes a very small increase in testosterone levels. Now, this may be mediated via its impact on cortisol. So essentially, the benefit that ashwagandha is most famous for is going to be the fact that it lowers our resting cortisol levels or lowers our stress hormones. And this is likely why we see an improvement in things like sleep when we take ashwagandha. Now, reduced cortisol levels can also have a beneficial impact on testosterone levels. So whether or not that's a direct or indirect impact, it does certainly seem to have a beneficial impact on our hormone profiles. And I would say that, if you are looking to use ashwagandha, this is the thing that it is probably most useful for. It's reducing how stressed and how anxious you feel. And that's probably the single biggest outcome that ashwagandha tends to have. It is that impact on anxiety. And in the literature, that tends to be one of the most beneficial impacts that we see. And that's what I would really recommend it be used or considered for. We do also see in the literature some pretty cool impacts on things like, VO2 max. Again, that's how fit you are, what your peak aerobic capacity is going to be. We see a very slight improvement in that. Almost completely useless if your goals are physique or body composition orientated. But if you have also got, sports performance goals, then that might be a cool additional benefit. From a health perspective, we see some pretty cool things with ashwagandha. Okay, so we see reductions in resting blood glucose levels and resting blood lipid levels. Now, these two have a huge impact on your longevity. So the lower the amount of sugars and fats circulating in your bloodstream, the healthier you tend to be from a cardiovascular perspective. So this is a pretty cool and niche impact of ashwagandha. And what we also tend to see, in addition to its benefits on things like your cortisol levels and your testosterone, we also see that it has some anti-inflammatory effects. Now, these anti-inflammatory effects may be responsible for another one of the outcomes that we tend to observe. Now, anti-inflammatories are great, okay? Antioxidants, anti-inflammatory effect. What we tend to see is that these are great for longevity, health, and recovery, okay? Now, I've warned previously about the dangers of super high antioxidant supplementation, especially around the workout window, because this can cause a small blunting of that anabolic effect. Simply put, we get less inflammation, we get less stimulus for muscle growth. However, on a chronic level, inflammation is not good for you. And taken away from the workout window and in the type of doses we typically use for ashwagandha, it is unlikely that this antioxidant effect is going to be high enough to noticeably reduce your muscle growth. In fact, we see an increase in lean muscle mass. So also has that benefit of being an antioxidant, but it's not enough to blunt its muscle growth or lean mass promoting impact. But it might be one of the reasons that we see an improvement in perceived recovery. So very often, when we talk perceived recovery, this is asking people, how recovered do you feel after training? One of the main things they're going to look at is going to be like, how sore am I? So this basically means that ashwagandha might have a little bit of a benefit on soreness. Again, it's very, very difficult to basically tease out the mechanisms of action on these things. Are all of these just benefits of reducing your cortisol levels, and getting better sleep? You do that and almost all of those things will improve. But we do have genuine scientific evidence that it does all of those things. We see more lean muscle mass gains, we see more strength, we see greater VO2 max, we see improved recovery, we see lower anxiety and stress, which, for many people's lifestyles is a massive bonus. So the literature looks pretty promising when you look at it in totality. However, and there is a big but to this, which is most of the positive evidence for ashwagandha comes from India. So these studies are done in India, and whilst most of the studies are done in India, there are a fair few that are done outside, but the ones that are done in India tend to have positive findings, and the much higher percentage of the ones done outside of India don't have the positive findings. Now, I don't know whether or not this means that there is a level of corruption, maybe, because it's manufactured in India. It might be that a certain supplier of ashwagandha is leaning on people to come out more favourably. This seems unlikely. I don't tend to buy into sort of conspiracy theories and that type of thing too willingly, but there definitely is a little bit of a divergence in the evidence in terms of, it's very positive when it's done in India, not necessarily quite so positive when it's done outside of India. So this is something that's going to require more studies, and I would sort of advise against jumping on board and being like, right, this is something that I need to be taking for the rest of my life because of all of these benefits. Because what we don't really know yet is, number one, will these beneficial outcomes be replicated in further studies? And number two, we don't really know what the effects of long-term supplementation are. We don't really have any signs that it's going to be bad for you yet, but we don't also have that many studies that go beyond 12 weeks. So it may well be, and I could be wrong, but from what I can see, I can't see many studies that are longer term that measure impacts on kidneys, this type of thing. So I don't know if there are any long-term impacts, but for this reason, I tend to recommend against taking it sort of year round, because it's very easy to just add stuff in constantly to your supplementation stack. And I tend to recommend it for higher stress periods. So I personally use it in periods where we're really busy with work, or I recommend it if people are either, going through a tough time personally, or a really hard training block, or at the end of a diet phase. So even if it's a placebo effect, I think, having something that you can introduce in, particularly if you're doing something like a competition prep or a really hard fat loss phase with the client, having something that you can introduce in that will reliably or feel like it is making them feel less anxious, more relaxed, and reducing that cortisol level. Because remember, hard fat loss or a big calorie deficit is pretty stressful on your system. Having something like that you can introduce in is a really, really good tool to have. So this is typically how I would recommend, or we would recommend, using ashwagandha. Rather than just having it in your routine constantly, I would err on the side of caution and say, look, this is a tool that I'm going to introduce during busier and more stressful periods, rather than just taking it year round. We don't have any evidence that it's bad for you. At the very worst, it may turn out that it is just wasting your money, okay? But it may also turn out down the line that it's got these side effects we weren't aware of, okay? But my gut reaction is that, as more evidence comes out, and based on what I've seen with myself, observed with myself, and also clients I've given it, I'm pretty sure that the cortisol reducing and therefore anxiety reducing impacts, I think they're pretty legit. I've noticed a lot of people get a real benefit from them. Now, whether or not you get an acute impact, so whether or not you take ashwagandha and you immediately feel more relaxed, or whether or not it's a little bit more chronic, it takes a little bit more time to build up, like creatine, that remains to be seen. My gut reaction is it is the second one. I think you need to take it for a while before you get much benefit from it. But I do think that in terms of sort of like dulling down stress, anxiety, and cortisol levels, obviously cortisol is your body's stress hormone, I think ashwagandha has some pretty legit benefits, and those reductions on cortisol will have an improvement on your recovery from training. They'll have an improvement on your sleep, and better sleep and better testosterone as a result. That will improve lean muscle mass gains. That will improve strength. It may turn out that there is some other mechanism via which ashwagandha impacts those outcomes, but we don't know what that is, okay? I can't see any literature that supports a purported mechanism beyond that indirect one. But, even if it is indirect, those are some pretty cool benefits. It may well be that, more really positive stuff comes out on ashwagandha, and I may well down the line, do a complete U-turn and be like, actually, all of you guys should be taking ashwagandha. It's absolutely great for you. It does seem to have, if we look at the current literature, big health benefits. It does seem to have big positive impact on body composition. We just don't know how replicated that will be as the body of evidence grows. So I always advise a bit of caution, but it is definitely something that can be used during more stressful periods, and I regularly recommend it to clients that are having a more stressful time or pushing harder with things like their dieting or their training. So what should you use if you're going to use ashwagandha? Well, I recommend using KSM 66. So this is like a standardized concentration. So you basically know that you are getting the root rather than just random bits of the plant. So the root has the thing called withanolides. Those are like the active ingredient in ashwagandha. So KSM 66, you sort of know what you're getting. If it's just ashwagandha randomly off Amazon, it's going to be a little bit less reliable that you are getting the bit of the plant that actually does something. I would recommend a dosage of around 500 milligrams a day. We've seen it tested to much higher, but 500 milligrams a day, I don't see much benefit taking it at certain times, morning versus evening or whatever. I personally take it in the morning when I'm using it, and that seems to provide pretty good benefits. But again, other people take it in the evening, doesn't matter too much. So I hope you guys find this useful. Doesn't necessarily mean that ashwagandha is going to be the next big thing. It's not going to give you like steroid-like gains or boost your testosterone or anything like that massively, but it does seem to have multiple fairly positive impacts. And I think if you are considering using it for sort of like stress and cortisol reduction, these type of things, I think it does have some benefits there to be offered.